Hello and welcome back to the Newman Numismatic Symposium 2020. For this block, we are joined by Kellen Hoard, 16-year-old young numismatist. Can you hear us, Kellen?
I can.
All right. And so today you have your presentation on the importance of stories to numismatics. And so you are free to share your screen and take over. Once again, for those who are listening in, use the Q&A feature on your device to post any questions, and we'll look to answer those at the end. All right. Take it away, Kellen.
All right. Well, thank you, Matthew. Welcome to my presentation on the importance of stories to numismatics. Don't really know why I had the idea for this specific subject, but as I'm listening to the different symposium presentations throughout so far, I think I've listened to just about all of them. There's a couple I wasn't able to make. Really, this theme has been repeated over and over again about the importance of stories to numismatics. Those of you who attended Charles Morgan's talk, he talked about the importance of stories, especially for our hobby going forward. Tom Sparks, in his talk about short snorters, he again mentioned how important stories are to that. And then even today, Fred Schwann talking about trend chart, again mentioning the stories and how much he appreciates those. So really, even from just this symposium, it's become clear to me how important stories are yet again. So let's just jump into the presentation here. So a kind of a quote to start off the thing with is a quote by now deceased numismatist Walter Breen. He described basically the questions he would ask himself when he's researching a coin, and it was this: why this design with these devices and inscriptions in this denomination, in this metal, at this weight, at this time, and not others. And I really think this gets us kind of in the right mindset here of what the subtext of what he's saying here. The subtext of these questions, kind of reading in between these lines, is what are the circumstances of the origin of this piece that I'm looking at, this coin, this token, this piece of paper money, this metal, this book. What's the origins? What's the history of this piece, and what are the stories surrounding this piece? So let's talk about stories really fast. Stories obviously play a massive role in humanity. I mean, throughout the history of humanity, stories are just ever present. And they're communicated in a lot of different ways. I mean, books, movies, TV, magazines, songs, podcasts, social media, dance. By voice, I mean like word of mouth, etc. Like, there's so many different ways to communicate stories. And of course, coins are one of them, but we'll get to that in a little second here. But there's just so many different ways that the stories have basically permeated humanity because they're so crucial. And why is that? Why are stories such an important part of society? So one theory, which is from Time Magazine, is that if you're popular, and storytellers are, you're more likely to have a partner, a mate. And I mean, sure, this is true, especially kind of in olden times, not necessarily relevant to numismatics. I haven't met a numismatist yet who is telling the stories of coins in a hope to find a partner, but that is definitely one aspect of why storytelling has maybe evolved as such an important part of society. But another theory here from Harvard Business School is that telling stories is one of the most powerful means that leaders have to influence, teach, and inspire. This is definitely true, definitely relevant to today. Stories are really crucial in achieving those three things, and actually some of the stories we're going to tell later on in this presentation, you'll see how there kind of was, how these stories can influence, teach, and inspire numismatists going forward. So this is applicable to numismatics, I think, that telling these stories allows us to definitely teach others, inspire others, and influence others. But there actually is a third theory that I really think sums it up better even for numismatics, and this is from The Atlantic magazine. And they write that perhaps the real reason that we tell stories again and again and endlessly praise our greatest storytellers is because humans want to be part of a shared history. And I really think this is apt. I really think this works for numismatics, in that basically this is what we're doing when we're collecting coins, is we're taking part in a shared history of these objects. We are becoming part of that. And so in order to really become part of the shared history, we tell the stories of the objects that we collect. And not only that, we tell the stories of the people who collected them. And I'll get into that here. So let's talk about humanity and numismatics, right? Because stories are essentially human. And I would argue that the hobby is an innately human one as well. It is human at its core. The people who created the objects that we collect, whether they be the coins, tokens, paper money, metals, checks, books, whatever, they were human, and so they had all the flaws that come with humans, and they had all the creativity that come with humans. Humans are very complex, and so naturally the objects that they create will have layers and complexity that reflect human complexity. And also the people who collect these objects, they are also human, and so they will make the same mistakes, have the same creativity, have all the same spectrum of humanness that the people who created the objects do. So the hobby is an innately human one, and it reflects that. And because the hobby is innately human and stories are innately human, they bring it together. And so what better way to become a part of that shared history that Atlantic was talking about than via the tangible results of the history, the objects that we collect. Those are the tangible like manifestations of the shared history that we're part of and that we're telling stories about. So let's jump into a story, for example. Let's talk about a couple stories here that I personally find interesting. There's no common theme between these stories. I just think they're kind of interesting and worth delving into, just out of purely interest. So this is about a man named J. Sanford Saltus. He was born in 1853 in Connecticut. And he was born into a pretty wealthy family. His father started the Saltus Steel Company, so he was born into wealth. Never really had to work his way all the way up. He just kind of started right at the top of the socioeconomic ladder. He was doing pretty well for himself, and he used that money to actually become a huge patron of the arts. He spent a lot of money investing in art schools in both the U.S. and France, specifically Paris. He spent a lot of money basically being a patron of those schools. And before the 1920s and 1930s, really coin collectors, they all kind of fit one demographic, and that was wealthy white males. There really wasn't any variation from that, so he kind of perfectly fit the demographic of a coin collector at the time, and he did become a coin collector pretty early on in his adult years, if I remember correctly. And he worked his way up pretty quickly. He became the American Numismatic Society corresponding secretary, so he communicated with all the membership about what the society was doing. He became president of the pretty prestigious New York Numismatic Club, and he also became president of the British Numismatic Society. So he was an international collector, and internationally known and ranked collector as well. And there's a little older picture of him right there. Saltus was a huge fan of metals. Like that was really his passion. Within the ANS, he was on their Orders and Decorations Committee. When he was around and active collecting, the ANS was really into creating medals and honors for its members and for artists. So that was a big committee to be on. So he was on that, and then he was the patron of most of the medals ANS did make between 1887 and 1922. He paid for their commission, their creation, their distribution. He was a really heavy sponsor of that and a really heavy patron. So he was a big fan, and he also collected medals in addition to creating them. And he also endowed the still given out ANS Saltus Award for outstanding achievement in the art of the medal. It's still given out to this day every year. And actually, the medal itself that's given out to those who win was designed by Adolf Weinman, who many of you know, who designed the Mercury dime and Walking Liberty half dollar. And actually, the recipients of this medal are basically a who's who of kind of the designing coins between the U.S. coins between 1900 and 1932-ish, like kind of that renaissance of American coinage, as it's called. I mean, you got everything from Victor David Brenner to Herman McNeil to James Earl Frazier and his wife Laura. So everybody basically won this that had designed coins during that time. Actually, Adolf Weinman won it the second year that it existed, and a lot of commemorative coin designers from that time period won it. And also, if in doing research for this, basically, if you go to Rockefeller Center in New York, any sculptures within like a block radius of that were designed by people who ended up winning this award because they ended up getting involved in medallic art also. So let's jump forward to London. Saltus was in London. It was June 23rd, 1922. And in the 20s, it was a pretty common practice to clean your coins, and there were a lot of different methods to do so. And one of them was cyanide, particularly on silver coins. But there were a lot of different ways, and it wasn't really frowned upon as much. And so while cleaning his coins, he had a glass of cyanide, and he ordered a glass of ginger ale. Some of you are probably ahead of me here in terms of what happened. Basically, the results were unsurprising. In the process of cleaning his coins, he accidentally drank the cyanide instead of the ginger ale, and ended up actually killing himself, basically becoming what I think of as a casualty of numismatics. Yeah, the sharpest tool in the shed for deciding to do both those things simultaneously. But no, the coroner actually ruled his death a death by misadventure is what they called it. But this was actually the night before he was to officially assume the presidency of the British Numismatic Society. He'd been elected, but he was going to a meeting there to officially assume it, but didn't end up being able to do that because he died. And as far as I know, this is probably the only death directly as a result of numismatics. There might be more that I'm unaware of, but I thought this was pretty interesting. Cyanide kind of fell out of favor. I don't know if it was because of him or just because as a method it fell out of favor. And what also I found interesting is that he had a first wife, kind of in the early 1900s, and then he divorced her. And on the night that he died, he was actually engaged to a second fiance. And when he died, she inherited a really sizable part of his estate. She ended up inheriting $500,000 in 1922 money. So she ended up with quite a bit of money there. But yeah, lesson of that story, the moral of the story is think things through in terms of when you're using cyanide. Let's jump to another story here about John J. Ford Jr. Being tricked. So Ford was really one of the most prominent numismatists of the 20th century. He was really major. He had this massive collection. Actually, it's right there on the shelf. It's 21, 24 parts, and just huge collection. Huge library as well. That was another 3 catalogs. You can't see it, but it's over on that side of the bookshelf right there. So great library as well. He had high positions in several companies, auction houses, organizations like the Professional Numismatist Guild. So he was pretty high up, but he also had his fair share of controversy. And I'm not going to jump into the controversy here because it's pretty extensive, but if you want to read more about it, Joel LaRose and Len Augsburger and Roger Burdett wrote a book about Eric Newman, and it's called True Seeker, and it's quite good, and it covers some of his controversy very well. So I recommend that you check that out to kind of learn more about some of the shadiness that he was involved with. But let's talk about him being tricked. So every kind of trick, every scam needs a premise. In 1859, a man from Chicago, his name was James Peck, he moved to Colorado. He'd heard that there was gold in Colorado, and he went there, and he actually found it. Unlike many gold miners throughout American history, he actually found gold pretty quickly, and a good size of it, a good quantity of it. And in order to make sure that he was able to keep all of it, he actually founded a city on top of the land called Empire, Colorado. And so he claimed all the gold. It all ended up working out for him, and he ended up quite wealthy. And he actually built this thing in the upper right corner that you see. It's called the Peck House. And it was the last stop that travelers would make. It was the last night they would stay before they began to cross the Rockies over to the western states, kind of the wild lands over there. And so it kind of gained a lot of recognition for being that last checkpoint. And it's actually rumored to be haunted, as a lot of buildings are from that time period. His granddaughter, Peck's granddaughter, died from a mysterious carriage accident, and it's rumored her ghost is still in that house today. So that was the premise. Peck died in 1880, and as a lot of mining towns do, they kind of ran out of metal, and with him no longer there to sustain any kind of vision, the town basically died. I think today it has about 280 residents, but it's really not much of a town anymore. The house is like a kind of a landmark in Colorado, but it's really not that thriving of a town. Every scam needs a con man. And so in 1969, there was a man named Michael Dugan, and I couldn't really find any more information on him. Probably very intentional on his part. Most con men don't really want people to know a lot about them. And he commissioned a few hundred of these fantasy tokens that you see at the right. He did 3 denominations, $2.50, $5, and $10, and he made them in brass, silver, and gold. The one you see on the right is in brass, and they all had a similar design. Basically, they all had the fake date 1876 with Empire City Mine, Empire, Colorado on the obverse, and on the reverse they had the denomination in Colorado gold. And these were purely fantasy. They were not at all affiliated with the town. And I have no clue why he chose this town, but that was what he ended up on. Every scam needs a mark. Dugan approached Ford, I believe in late 1960s, basically saying he had no knowledge of their origin. He didn't know where they were from. He didn't know how many there were. He didn't know who had made them. He claimed he was clueless. Of course he wasn't. He was the one who made these. And Ford actually took the bait. He bought almost all of them for $900. And as you can see on the inflation calculator on the right, that ends up being about $6,300 today. It was a sizable purchase with no knowledge. So Ford definitely took a guess on that. And I'm not really sure why he took the bait. Maybe there's infinite reasons. Maybe Dugan was just a really good con man. But he took the bait and bought almost all of them and took the scam. some scams have a realization, and Ford did realize 6 years later that he'd been tricked. And I also couldn't find how he'd been tricked, but he did in fact realize, which has got to be a sinking feeling there, that you've just bought several hundred fantasy tokens. And he later claimed, whether or not this is true, that it was one of the only times he'd been duped, one of the only times he'd been tricked. And I give him credit for fessing up to messing up there, but I don't know if it's true that was one of the only times he did. And he actually sold 2 sets in his sale, one denomination set of brass pieces and one of gold pieces. And I couldn't find the auction price for the brass pieces, but the gold pieces sold for $1,300. It was very interesting to me that they did. They sold for $1,300, considering that they're fantasy pieces. Their gold value is not worth that. Where's the value coming from, right? And basically, my theory is that it was the stories. Getting back to that, the whole importance of stories in numismatics. People want to pay for a kind of a fun story, and to see that one of these really expert people got tricked is kind of fun to have that story. And also, the town itself is very interesting. Has some more stories I wasn't able to tell. I recommend researching that town more. But it's really quite an interesting thing. In addition to there also being a fun story around it, there is of course the fact that John Ford owned it, and sometimes big names like that at a premium. But I would argue that name is also a story. It's a story. It's the persona of John J. Ford. And so I would argue that was the main reason for that premium on those coins. All right, here's a different story. I titled it "The Geopolitical Power of Pirates." And in fact, they do have some power. So around the turn of the 19th century, pirates from the Barbary states were incessantly attacking these American merchant ships sailing through the Mediterranean to get to Europe and trade in Europe. And they were quite ruthless about it. They would capture the ships, keep all the cargo for themselves or sell it off, ransom the crews back to their home countries. And if the countries didn't pay the ransom, the crews would be sold into slavery. And if the countries didn't want this to happen, at the beginning of each year, they had to pay a tribute, essentially, to the states. It ended up, it was a couple, or I don't remember exactly, I think it was like $25,000 a year and for the tribute, and it got a little bit bigger each year, but it was tens of thousands of dollars if they didn't want them to be attacked. And so the Americans really decided, we don't want to go through this expensive war. We don't think it's worth it. And we just went through the Revolutionary War, basically, like a couple decades ago. We're just going to pay the tribute and get it over with. And this was not really well liked by the public at all. It was a bad decision by the executive branch and by Congress. It backfired pretty quickly on them. And one congressman, actually, his name was Robert Goodloe Harper, he coined this phrase that really caught the public sentiment pretty well and became their rallying cry, which called for millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. So he wanted millions to defend our merchants, not 1 cent for tribute to the states. And now that's him in the upper right corner there, a picture of Harper. So the Americans revised their response, but only after a couple more prompting. France had a separate geopolitical dispute with the United States, and so they decided, hey, you know what? We're also going to get in on this action of attacking American merchants, and so they started attacking the ships. Great Britain was still a little annoyed, more than annoyed, that America had won the Revolutionary War, and so just out of spite, they started attacking the American ships too. And so the U.S. got fed up. The public was against it, so they actually started constructing the Navy to defend their merchant ships. That was one of the primary catalysts for creating the Navy, and they built these big ships to defend our merchant ships. And actually, abolitionists later adapted Congressman Harper's quote during the 1860s to change it to millions for freedom, not 1 cent for slavery. So it was a really popular phrase. In the upper right corner there, you can see a picture of a token probably made around the turn of the 19th century, basically with that rallying cry. It became really quite a sensation. And actually, what happened when I was researching this is the U.S. basically sent their navy over to the Barbary states, and a couple of the states immediately saw the threat, and they basically signed treaties with the United States. But some really didn't give up, and they kind of went to a naval war. And I don't remember which one it was, but basically, one of the Barbary states, one of its ships had surrendered in the war. They'd raised the white flag. The Americans boarded to take control of the ship, and then the Barbary pirates killed all the Americans on board, which went against the rules of war at the time. If you surrender, you can't do that. And the Americans basically said, "All right, we see how it is." So every ship that they subsequently captured, they didn't allow prisoners. They just killed everybody on board. They would not accept prisoners, and that's just kind of the way it was. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting as well, that the Navy was constructed because of pirates there. All right, most of you probably know this story, and you have some idea of it here. In 1883, there was a new nickel design released in the U.S. It had, of course, the Roman numeral V on the reverse to indicate 5 cents, but there was no cents on the bottom. And some enterprising individuals decided, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to gold plate these and pass them off as $5 gold pieces. And they did, in passing resemble $5 gold pieces circulating at the time in a quick transaction. Nobody would really notice. And these people were called racketeers. And you can see a picture of a racketeer nickel at the right. And there's this one Bostonian, his name was Josh Tatum. He was deaf and he was mute, and he was a racketeer himself. And basically what he would do is he would go to these small stores with these plated nickels, and he'd buy a 5-cent cigar with the nickel. And most of the time, the store owner would give him $4.95 in change. Or if they weren't fooled, he'd just get the cigar, no water off his back. But most of the time, he'd get $4.95 in change. And he made quite a bit of money doing it this way. I found some numbers that basically were around $15,000, which would be about $384,000 today. And as you can see in the upper right, basically what that's illustrating is he was kind of traveling down the East Coast from Boston to New York, scamming store owners as he went on his way. So he basically not repeating the scam with any one store owner, but he'd go down. And so I was traveling to New York. He was actually arrested and taken to court by the store owners who he had scammed out of the money. But he got away innocent. He was clearly guilty, but he got away innocent because he never said the coin was worth $5. Remember, he was mute, and so the court said, yeah, I mean, he never said it was worth it. The store owners basically scammed themselves out of the money. But is it true, is the real question. The veracity of the story has been questioned several times, whether or not it's true. People have done research into Boston records at the time, looking for a Josh Tatum who lived there, and they didn't find any. But the story goes back pretty close to contemporary times. When this was happening, so there's that. And racketeers definitely were real. It's just we don't know if Josh Tatum specifically was real. But I would argue it actually doesn't matter if the story's real. You need to include the caveat when you're telling it that it might not be real. But I would argue generally it doesn't matter if it's real, and here's why. It's really a clever story, kind of illustrating. It's just clever. It's engaging, and it has an educational foundation. It's kind of like historical fiction to me, right? It's based on true events, and then kind of telling a specific story to illustrate those broader events. So as long as you include the caveat that this might not be true, the story teaches something, and it engages people in and encourages them to learn more about numismatics and about the stories they're involved with, because they hear this clever story and they want to know more. So let's talk a little bit more about the value of stories in numismatics. There are so many stories. Every coin, every token, every piece of paper money, every medal, every book, every check, anything that numismatists collect, each type within that has a story. So let's for U.S. coins, like every design of cent and every date of cent and every mint mark of cent, each of those have their own individual stories. Some more interesting than others, but each one has, most of them have very interesting circumstances under which they were created. So each individual type for every country ever, going back thousands of years, there's just so many stories for each of those things, right? Each owner has their story, and this works in a couple ways. One in that if you have like a pedigreed coin, for example, and there's some kind of like famous provenance to your coin, there's stories surrounding that. Why did they purchase this coin? Were they collecting something broader? And the story of the owner itself, like John J. Ford Jr., who's quite an eccentric guy almost, and so kind of the stories that he brings to the table in owning this coin. Personal connection. So a lot of people will collect coins that have horses on them, or coins that have boats on them, or coins that are octagonal from around the world. And they'll have some personal thing that they're collecting. And the stories surrounding that, or it's connected to stories in that, why are there horses on this coin? Why are there boats on this coin? Why is this coin octagonal? The stories surrounding the reasoning for that are also there. So even the personal connection stories are ever present. This token up in the upper right here is from a base that the Americans had during the Vietnam War in South Vietnam. And I purchased the token a couple of years ago just because I wanted to do more research on it. It was pretty cheap. And I did, and I learned about the base. It was a very interesting base, quite a major role. And I was talking to my grandfather about it because he'd served in the Vietnam War. And he said, yeah, I was stationed at that base briefly. And that prompted a whole nother set of conversations about his experience in Vietnam. So that's another thing with personal connection, is that these stories can even arise, and it's like, oh, I didn't even know that I had some like connection to this token, and yet another story arises. And stories affect everything. A lot of people collect coins for so many different reasons, infinite reasons, but a lot of the main ones are art, profit, etc. But I would argue that stories affect all of those. The art on numismatic items is known to be beautiful. Books have been written about the art on numismatic items. But why is the art that way? Why are the symbolic devices that way? If you went to Doug Mudd's talk about earlier in the symposium about how coins are used to express sovereignty, the thought that goes into the design of these to meet very certain needs and specifications for the geopolitical moment that was happening when these were created. The stories surrounding that are why the art is the way it is. In terms of profit, some people just get into coins for profit, but what are the stories surrounding that? And there's a couple different aspects of that. First of all, stories regarding why certain coins are profitable, right? Why are certain coins more profitable than others? Oftentimes it's because of the stories and the history that these pieces have, even if it doesn't really logically make sense that they are of a certain value. And then the other aspect of profit is that there's actually stories about people who try to make profits in numismatics, right? You hear stories of when Wall Street traders came into the hobby and were trying to make some quick money, and you hear stories. Remember, thinking back to that Harvard Business School quote, you kind of learn from those stories. You can teach other people from those stories. You don't just come to the hobby to make a profit. You got to learn about what you're doing. So the stories connect very heavily to profit. A lot of collectors started out just pushing Lincoln Cents into Whitman albums, right, or something similar, filling up an album, and they started collecting just because they wanted to complete every hole in that album. But why are there that number of holes in the album? Why do Lincoln Cents go from 1909 to present? Why does the wheat cent design stop after 1958? Why are some holes in the Whitman album plugged? Because the coins are so rare. It's all about the story surrounding it. We know that Lincoln Cents started in 1909 because Theodore Roosevelt kind of wanted a redesign of U.S. coinage. And after Augustus St. Gaudens died, Victor David Brenner came up and basically started designing the Lincoln Cent. So the stories surrounding that affect the holes that you're filling. And also, as I kind of mentioned earlier about like collecting coins with horses on them or boats on them or whatever, whatever specific niche you're collecting, that's affected by the stories. I met a woman once who was trying to collect a coin from each of the 195 countries that are currently on Earth. And why are there 195 countries to collect from? Why is that? Why is that the state of our world? Why is I don't think Palestine was on our list. I asked, why is Palestine on the list? There's all the stories surrounding that, right? And all the countries that have broken up since then in World War I. Why is the Ottoman Empire still not around today? All the stories surrounding how our world formed affect your collecting. So here's what I've been doing to spread some stories. In 2016, I launched an account on the app Instagram, coin themed. You can see a picture of kind of my profile, right? It's not the whole profile, but it's a screenshot of part of it. And I basically post coins and tokens and paper money and medals and books and everything from my collection that I think has a very interesting story. And I try and share those stories with my audience. And I have numismatist followers on there who follow the account, but also I have a pretty good amount of non-collector peers from school or wherever, just that I know in my non-numismatic life, and also rookie collectors who are just coming into the hobby. They're just kind of understanding that they're interested in coins, and they really truly engage with these posts and with the stories. I've had school friends who just don't indicate any interest, and they say, Kellen, this story is just really, really interesting for me. If you look at the picture there, that top middle one with the three women on it, it's a coin picturing three sisters from South America who were involved in a revolution down there, I believe Dominican Republic, and several people were just like this. Several of my school friends were like, this is just really, really fascinating. They don't have an interest in coins, but they found the stories fascinating regardless. And there's definitely an audience for these stories as well. Over the last years, I've gotten 1,800 plus followers, and other accounts on Instagram have more. I mean, but 1,800 people wanting to hear the stories of these coins on a relatively new platform, and a relatively young platform at that. A lot of the people who follow, collectors and not, are younger people, so that should give some sign of hope that this many people are interested. And a lot of people on Instagram, a lot of collectors, they'll buy coins or sell coins, they'll auction coins on their page, they'll raffle coins on their page, and so they get some followers for kind of being involved in that marketplace. But I don't. I just do stories, and I've still built up this audience. It's clear that there's a market for that, or a market for learning these stories. And as I mentioned before, school peers when you follow on Instagram, posts from the people you follow appear on your page. Like Facebook, for those of you who are familiar with that, or yeah. So it appears on your page. And so the school peers who really shouldn't want to see coins on their page, these people are on Instagram so they can see their friends out and about doing stuff. There's no reason for them to want coins to appear there, and so it doesn't really make sense for them to follow me. But they do, and they've told me, multiple of them have told me, it's really just because even though they're not interested in coins themselves, they really find the history behind it quite fascinating. If you look at my profile there, by the way, you can see the link in my bio for this symposium. So gotta do some self-promotion. Even beyond Instagram, I've been trying to do stuff. People love hearing the stories even more than online while they're holding while they're holding the coin in their hand, or the token in their hand, or any of the object in their hand. That is just really powerful for them. I'm sure some of you have done the thing where you go into schools and maybe you'll show off your coins to some of these kids here, and those of you who have done that know kids really do engage with it. They find it really fascinating and really interesting to hold this piece of history. I know the History in Your Hands Foundation does a similar thing where they'll bring in all kinds of old artifacts and they'll tell their kids the stories of these while they hold it in their hands. And so I've done that before, and non-collector people really do enjoy that. It gets them interested. And something I've done, which is a little bit tricky, but it's a way to get them interested, is I'll ask them for help for researching a coin. I'll bring in a coin I already kind of know about, and I'll tell them a little bit of the story. I'll get them started, and I'll say, hey, can you help me with the research on this? And they'll, hearing that little hook, hearing that little snippet of the story, they engage. In middle school, when I was in 8th grade, I brought in a French coin from the 1790s that was minted during the French Revolution, and I told them, I kind of hooked them in with the story about the French Revolution and Dupré, who designed this coin. He was a very famous designer and engraver, and I hooked them in with stories about him, and they said, we want to help you research. They were interested in kind of learning more, it's because of the stories. And then, as you can see from this picture on the right, it was pre-hold, I promise. I didn't hold it myself. I got one of those 1883 nickels. It's not a racketeer nickel. It's one of the unaffected nickels. But I put it on my keychain. And here's why: is that I always have something that they can hold in their hands on me, right? I'm always carrying my keys around in my pocket, and so if we need to talk about that, I can pull that out and tell the story of Josh Tatum and tell the story of the racketeers. And people are interested in it truly, and it's just a way to kind of keep something always on you. But I've also tried bringing in the Red Book, right? Very iconic reference, very useful reference as well. It is genuinely a very good tool. But I've brought in the Red Book to show people before, and they just really haven't as engaged as much. They see the specifications and the numbers, and I think it's a little overwhelming for them almost. But it just doesn't have that same grab as just the pure stories do. And stories are still being created. Stories are always being created, and they're evolving. Stories change as we learn more, and as a hobby. Those of you who went to Joel and Len's talk earlier in the symposium about the fantastic $1804 know kind of the story of how we learned more about the $1804, right? After it was minted for decades, like a century, there were so many mysteries surrounding this coin. No one really knew. And as Eric Newman and Ken Brissett were researching their book to write about this dollar, even they, in 1962 there, right, they kind of knew what they knew, and they firmly believed that, in fact, the U.S. had not sent any $1804 overseas as part of a diplomatic mission. They believed that it was not. They called it delusion in their book. And then, at the World's Fair Money in Detroit, Ken Brissett heard a presentation by a man named David Spink, who said, no, we actually got consigned $1804 from overseas as part of the set that was given to the King of Siam. And so that completely evolved the story, that shattered their worldview in terms of what the story surrounding the creation of the 1804 dollars were, and so they had to reprint the book series. And if you want to learn more, you can watch Joel and Len's recorded talk later. But the stories evolved as they learned more. Speaking of which, of the 1804 dollar, it was given to the King of Siam in the mid 19th century, in the early 19th century-ish, 30s, I think. And what ended up happening is, those of you who have seen the movie or play King and I by Rodgers and Hammerstein, the Anna, the leading woman's grandchildren were actually the ones who consigned this set. So even there's that kind of actually kind of like pop culture, is her grandchildren were the ones who kind of brought this to light for everybody. So stories are always evolving, but they're also being made. People are still making coins, tokens, paper money, medals, books. They're still being produced, and so with every production comes stories surrounding that. They're also being made by the people who collect them, right? Collectors continue on, and as they live their lives, as humanity keeps on going, stories continue to be created. And so here's a story about people. Here's a story about people. In 2017, I went to my first ANA summer seminar, and those of you who have gone know it's always amazing. Those of you who haven't very much should when it's in person again. I've never heard anyone go who hasn't liked it, and most people rave about it. And so in 2017, it was my first summer seminar. I've been waiting several years to go, and I was finally old enough. I was 13, and so I was quite excited. So I went to summer seminar, and at the end of each week of summer seminar, they host a banquet. It's a pretty nice banquet. They give out a lot of awards. They serve some nice food, all this kind of stuff. They recap the week, basically. And at this particular banquet, they were serving ribs. And I had not really eaten many ribs before. I maybe like one time before that. And so I was eating them pretty unsuccessfully. I take my fork and my knife, and I was cutting right across the bone, which it turns out is not really an effective way to eat your meat. And I was doing this for quite an extended period of time. And unfortunately, it is caught on video by the girl you see in the center there. Her name's Abby. So that video is I'm working on erasing it. But ultimately, the video existed, and the people who were at the table watching me and laughing with me as I tried to eat this meat, they all became my great friends. A lot of them were young numismatists, and they were really good people who I got to know better over the next years. And really, that was what keeps me in the hobby. I was thinking about it, and I love the stories surrounding the objects that we collect. Truly, I find it quite fascinating, and that's what got me interested in the first place. But the people who are around today collecting them are really what keep me in the hobby. A lot of numismatists, they are idiosyncratic, odd, kind of, some of them are kind of bonkers, but they're smart people, they're interesting people, they're great conversationalists, and that is, as I meet more and more people and learn more and more from these people who have insane wealths of knowledge, that is what really, the stories that I make with those people, like eating this meat unsuccessfully, is really what keeps me in it. And there's different types of stories. There's the stories that we pass down as numismatists about our objects, about the pieces we collect. And it's really important that we pass them down. We're part of that shared history. It's important that we pass it down to the next generation, not only because it's interesting and it gets new collectors engaged, but also just it's because it's part of our hobby. It's necessary. And it's just interesting to learn about the stories of these objects, and it's fun. But the stories that we make together with other numismatists that we're collecting with, the friends of numismatists we have, and these other numismatists, being human, they make mistakes. One dealer accidentally threw out a Stella $4 gold coin one time in his garbage can, went to the dump, couldn't find it, lost forever, likely. Very human mistake, but it's a good story. And then the successes that come with being a human, the mistakes and the successes, that's the fun part. Because numismatics is a human hobby, and stories are quintessentially human. They tie together perfectly, and so when you're with other people, that is what really, with other numismatists, with other collectors, that is what really the value in our hobby is. So that's about my entire presentation. Hope you learned something here. Hope you came away with maybe some things to think about in terms of the stories. There are so many more stories I could have told. This in the other slide. There's just basically infinite stories in numismatics, and no one will ever record them all down, which is quite unfortunate. Some people are doing some good work trying to record those stories, but in multimedia formats. Because remember, stories come in all different ways, not only in the objects we collect, but in books that people are always writing, in articles, which is a great reason to write an article, is to kind of share some of that knowledge, some of those stories that maybe you're the only one who has, right? You're a collector, you had some kind of experience that shouldn't get lost to time, right? people are hosting podcasts. YouTube videos are making a big thing in coins. Social media is really big. I'm a big proponent of social media and numismatics to share these stories. So really just finding ways to share the stories that you have and make sure they aren't lost. But yeah, that's about it. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kellen, for the presentation. I know we have already a number of questions in, but once again, for those of you listening in, if you want to send in questions, use the Q&A feature on the bottom. Now, I've seen multiple questions of a similar type, and I think a lot of people just want to know, what's your background, Kellen? How long have you been in numismatics? How'd you sort of get started? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess started when I was 9, so it would be about 7 years ago now. And my grandparents were pretty big travelers, and so what they would do is they would bring in coins from all around the world, and they'd bring it back to me. They say, we don't really have any use for this, and I was like, all right, I'll take them. And I kind of dumped them in a jar. And after a little while of having them in a jar, being a 9-year-old, I decided, hey, I'm kind of tired of having them in a jar. So I took them out of the jar, and I started looking at them a little bit, and I started putting them into some 2x2s that I'd been gifted, and that was kind of what got me started. At Christmas, I got a little folder to put them in, the 2x2s in, and really that was it. I just thought they were kind of cool, and I wanted to learn more about them. I also did the 50-state quarter program, that of course helped, and so kind of my 2 original collecting categories were U.S. coins and foreign coins, and then as a lot of collectors do, I kind of narrowed down there. But since then, I've just tried to get involved in every aspect. I attend a lot of shows. I'm pretty involved with the ANA and go to summer seminar. A year ago, I got into the board of governors of the Pacific Northwest Numismatic Association. So just trying to do some stuff in the Pacific Northwest, write some articles, sell some coins, and of course, trying to share the stories online as much as I can. That's about it for that.
That's awesome. Let's see. I know one sub question that we had here is, are you published at all?
Yeah. Well, not books, but articles, yes. I think I've written for the Asylum, for the Numismatic Bibliomaniac Society, the Pennywise for the Early American Copper Society, Nor'Wester, which is Pacific Northwest Numismatic Association, Asylum also, and I'm forgetting 2. I don't remember. But honestly, my proudest accomplishment a little while ago, and this actually has heavily to do with stories. Oh, I should have put this in the presentation. So in 8th grade, there was this project that my school did. It's actually a national competition. It's called National History Day, and basically a nationwide theme is set. My year was conflict and compromise. So a nationwide theme is set, and then you look at a topic in history, and you can either write an essay, make a website. Make an exhibit board, do like a performance, or there's one other one I'm forgetting. I don't know, but I ended up writing an essay for this, and I chose to write my essay about the founding of the U.S. Mint, kind of that period between 1776 and 1792, and all the debate that happened between Morris and Jefferson and Hamilton, and talking about that, the conflict and the compromise there. And I actually ended up kind of working my way up through the ranks of the competition, and I won first place nationally for my paper. It was about 500,000 contestants. I ended up winning, and I was very excited about it. And I got like a award from the National Endowment for the Humanities, so very thrilling. But what stuck out to me is each level at the local, state, and national level, the judges would leave comments on my sheets about what they thought I could improve upon, what they found interesting, etc. And what they said is when they read the title about that was going to be about coins. I think it's called like 17 years. It was a pretty boring title. They read my title and they're like, ugh, like this is going to be so boring. And then they would read it and they said, really, it was good writing and all that, but the story itself was what really stuck out to us. We found that truly to be interesting, and we want more about this. And wanted to learn more. So that even stuck out to me of like these people heard the subject and were like, oh, that's boring. But once they actually learned about the story, that was what appealed to them. It wasn't the objects, it was the story surrounding those objects. So yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. I see a comment here from an audience member saying, John Ford once told me the real reason for all the stories that they're the sizzle that sells the steak. The stories are the marketing tool that sells the coins. Without the stories, they're just coins.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a preferred time period of stories or that you are particularly interested in? or just sort of any stories that you can come across in general in regards to these coins?
Sure. Well, okay. So, well, that's what's interesting to me as well is that the stories basically traverse all time periods. There's no aspect of numismatics that really is just barren of stories. It's just the objects being the objects, right? In terms of my specific interest, I kind of range. I range pretty widely, and that's kind of what my collection has become. It moved from like the U.S. foreign when I was 9 to excuse me, to kind of more specific things. Like I'm a big fan of like sample slabs and literature. But now what I find myself really pursuing is just pieces that have interesting stories behind them, and that's what really appealed to me. So I'm not really limited by any kind of time period. I try and do my research on objects that interest me, and then track one down and acquire it, and then share it with other people. So that's the important part. Is you don't just keep the stories to yourself. You continue to pass them on.
Absolutely. Another question asker wants to know, do you think young people today are less interested in history than older generations?
Ooh, good question. No. I just think history is taught really badly in schools. I'm a really big fan of history. I love it. And I go to school and I'm in history class. And even as much as I love history, I'm just kind of bored by it. There's not a lot of creativity in teaching, at least in my experience. There's a lot of PowerPoints and essays, and occasionally maybe something to mix it up, like some kind of artistic project to mix it up. But there's really, it's taught in not a super fascinating way, and there's so many better ways it could be done, including bringing in these physical objects of time periods that we're learning about. It's a pretty easy thing to do. And so I understand why kids say that they don't like history. It's because they had never really been taught it in an interesting way. But when I share the history of these objects with them, they show a passion for it. And so this tells me that really it's not so much a problem of young generations being less interested than it not being communicated well down.
Oh, I agree absolutely. You see like the success recently from like the Hamilton play and like a retelling of history and just a new format just sparks interest, and suddenly people are looking into these. So I see what you're doing here, and just continuing that trend with these artifacts that otherwise might be looked over.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I know you said you've written articles, but not a book. Is there any consideration on like if a particular subject you would be interested if you considered writing a book, or
No.
nothing?
No, nothing for me. I don't have any specific thing to write a book about really, but I'll think about it. I enjoy articles. I think they're a really effective mode of transportation or of communication rather, especially in terms of getting new people involved. As we all know, people have shorter and shorter attention spans, and so even though I love books, I'm a huge fan of reading. I know that articles are a good way to communicate information to people with those short attention spans.
Absolutely. Let's see, a recommendation here. I'd recommend *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind* by Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay.
For more theories on why humans need stories.
For sure, yeah.
Let's see.
I put it on my pile of books here.
Let's see. Just a quick comment on great presentation.
Thank you.
Let's see. Looking into this. And so you talked a little bit about how you got into numismatics. What would you consider the first coin that you collected, per se?
Oh, I don't remember any of the really early coins. In terms of like actually acquiring a coin, buying a coin. Ooh, that's tricky. You know, I really couldn't tell you. But what I will say on the subject is that I think my first coin show, it was a local show around here. It was up north a little bit ways. I went to this. Actually, you know, it wasn't even at a show. It was at there was a local coin club. So I'm a really big proponent of the internet's role in numismatics, and one of the reasons is I found my very first coin club with the internet. I looked up. I was getting kind of into coins in 2014. I looked up coins near me, or like coin clubs near me. There's one several miles north, and I convinced my parents. I was like, "Let me come to this coin club," and then they said, "Fine, we'll take you there," because I couldn't drive at the time. And so I went up there, and people were just so welcoming to me. They were kind of a traditional local coin club, in that they just kind of ate their snacks and talked amongst each other and maybe traded a few coins. But that was really what got me instantly engaged. And they told me, I don't mean to keep like hammering this point down, but they told me the stories of the objects that I was collecting, and so probably the first thing I collected or purchased was from one of them there. And then they were very supportive of me throughout that.
Absolutely. Now, I know you mentioned you posted a couple articles. Are there certain sites that you'd recommend for people possibly looking into the hobby, maybe trying to find good stories to get invested, or?
Sure, sure. Well, I know you mentioned the other day, Matthew, that you're going to start collecting here. You better. So maybe you need some of this here. But no, in terms of the websites that are really interesting, actually, what I'd recommend, there's some really great websites. One of the ones I got started on was the ANA website, money.org, that just has some good articles to get started with. But what I'd actually really recommend is getting a subscription to an ANA membership. It's like 1 year. For kids, it's like, for the platinum one, which you get the print magazine, it's like 26, and I think for adults it's 40 something. But no, seriously worth it. And the Numismatics really has some great information to get started. And of course, Newman Numismatic Portal has some good information as well. But that's definitely for like kind of research centric as well. And then if you want to just get like introductory stuff, there's lots of resources online available for you that you can just kind of Google.
Absolutely. Looks like we have another question coming in. Do you use coins in commerce or digital forms of money? How important is using coins as money to the future of numismatists? I guess with a lot of currency now going digital transactions,
Sure.
How does that sort of?
Yeah, well, and so there's of course like debit cards and credit cards, and then there's like cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies I don't know anything about, but I know the bare minimum. So I really have no expertise in that. But in terms of the transition away from coins, I'm a proponent of actually getting rid of the link and cent. I don't think we need it anymore. But in terms of coins in general, whether they're still necessary and effective, I'm not really sure if they're really used in commerce. Well, they're still used. They're still used, and that we can see that through the coin shortage of COVID. But the role that they play has definitely been diminished, and I really feel that that's okay. The role of in the 1850s, when the large cents were removed, that basically sparked American numismatics. That was one of the main causes of kind of it catching on a little bit more, is that these coins kind of went away and people got a little nostalgic, and they wanted to collect things that they knew and that they had used in their childhood and all kind of stuff. So taking it away, I'm not sure it would be bad for the hobby specifically. I think that might actually spark some interest. I don't think I think we should still continue making coins in general, but I don't think it would necessarily have a super negative impact on the hobby itself.
Absolutely. Looks like we have about another 8 minutes for this time block. So if people want to get any last minute questions in, now's the time. In the meantime, Kellen, where can people find you, reach out and follow?
Sure. Yeah. So you can email me if you want. My email is literally just my name, kellenhoard@gmail.com. So if you have anything you want to say or ask, you can go for it. You can, of course, follow me on Instagram, kind of hear some of those stories. And I know lots of you aren't necessarily familiar with Instagram. It's kind of a very young person's game, and some of you are young at heart, I know, but still. If you are interested in kind of learning more about Instagram and kind of the value it has, and just learning the bare minimum of getting on the app and kind of seeing some of these stories, you can also email me at kellenhoard@gmail.com, and I have like a 10-step process for getting involved in the app. It's super simple. And yeah, anyway, so if you're interested in that as well. Other than that, I mean, yeah, that's kind of the way to contact me if you need to. Yeah.
Absolutely. Looks like we got a couple more questions coming in. Do you have opinions on modern mint products?
Oh, modern mint products. So I don't really personally collect those. Whether or not they're kind of hit or miss in my experience with them. Some definitely. Actually, I believe Charles Morgan talked about this yesterday. I thought he summed it up pretty well. I don't want to paraphrase so as to misrepresent him, but what he talked about is the ones that kind of hit it off have some kind of connection to like lifestyles almost, like they have some kind of broader connectability to people buying them. And so I would even relate that back to what coins the U.S. like commemorative coins, for example, what coins the U.S. Mint makes that are that people can connect to, and one of the main reasons that they connect is via kind of those stories that connect them to it. So if a lot of people, like millions of people every year, just love national parks, right? And I don't remember how successful the national park one was, but that was one of the few kind of modern commemorative coins I purchased, is because I have really fond memories of going to national parks, and that kind of connection to me. And those kind of memories are what really prompted me to do that. So I really think that they have potential. I'm not really sure. I have doubts about like the packaging that they do for kids, right? Like they do like, oh, here's like a fun little thing. I don't know their sales numbers, but what I would tell them is that kids that I know aren't really the packaging isn't what appeals to them. It's what's inside and the background that can be provided by that.
Another comment just saying the future of numismatics appeared to be in good hands. Great presentation.
Well, thank you.
Couldn't agree more. What is the current story that you're chasing down?
Oh, the current story. Oh, that's kind. What? Okay. Well, I'm actually just starting an article, and I had an idea for an article basically, which was just talking about it was kind of a similar thing to this, not so much stories, but just kind of talking about the people in the hobby and how they're just kind of some oddballs, but they're amazing people and fantastic people, and so just kind of writing about not with any kind of specificity, but just about the people in the hobby and how that really I think is the value that we have going forward. A lot of people worry about the future of the hobby, and I really think and there's all the questions of what does it mean that we're online for the time being, right? Like, but I really think that as long as we keep sight of the fact that the people are really what keep people engaged with it, right? You can bring people in with the coins, but you keep them engaged with the other people. That's kind of about that. But yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I like that. I'll have to keep an eye out for it. What do you see as your future in numismatics or any other fields?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I've been asked that since I was 9, and I still have no clue. If you have any suggestions, let me know.
Can send those your way. Following, any opinions on colorized coins?
Oh, like the basketball coins that came out. Yeah, they're fine. They're interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I might buy one. I think it's kind of interesting that the U.S. Mint's doing it now. I hope it helps their sales. But yeah, colorless coins. They're an interesting idea. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's most of the questions we have right now. I'll go ahead and pause for maybe one last quick round for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll go ahead and close out for the block.
Well, we have a couple more. There's a couple more talks coming out today, right?
Absolutely. Oh yes, we got a couple more lined up. Let's see who's on docket. Following up, looks like we have Doug Davis up next block. Should be an interesting talk. Look back. All right, I think that's about all we have. So once again, thank you so much, Kellen, and hope to see you all at a couple more of these future shows, and have a good rest of your all's day.
Thank you all for attending. Thanks, Matthew.